On that early morning at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in Atlanta, everything seemed no different from any other ordinary day. The sound of luggage rolling across the marble floors, the repeated overhead announcements, and the hurried goodbyes filled the air. This familiar scene unfolded like an instrumental melody, an indispensable part of the daily rush experienced by thousands of travelers. But today, something would happen that would change everything that seemed so normal forever. Among the bustling crowd, no one noticed the petite girl walking through security, holding a first-class ticket in hand. This ticket wasn't just a pass to enjoy her flight. It was a beautiful gift from her loved one. A person no one could have imagined to be the most powerful figure in the aviation industry. Maya Johnson, 16 years old, entered the first-class area with a calm yet confident demeanor. She wore a long black coat, white jeans, and simple sneakers. Her gaze was calm but sharp, and no one could tell that she was the daughter of Marcus Davis, the CEO of SkyJet Airlines, the world's largest airline conglomerate. Maya wasn't the type of person to seek attention. She preferred to stay in the background, not drawing too much focus to herself. Today was no different. She didn't need anyone to know who she was. She simply wanted to enjoy this flight like any other passenger. But perhaps her life had never been this simple. Curious eyes began to rest upon her as she entered the first-class cabin. Some people looked at her with suspicion. It wasn't because she seemed out of place or different, but because, in their eyes, she didn't belong here. Sharp looks and whispered comments quickly spread, causing the atmosphere to tense. A man in a gray suit glanced at his wife, then said softly, "That girl must have made a mistake. There's no way she could have a first-class ticket." His wife only smiled, saying nothing, but her eyes reflected a sense of doubt. That comment wasn't just skepticism. It was an unspoken affirmation that people like her don't have the right to be here. Maya heard it. She didn't turn around or pay any attention to their whispers. She simply kept walking, unconcerned. She was used to living under the gaze of others, but she never felt the need to prove anything. The people around her were strangers, and she had no reason to feel compelled to explain herself. But she didn't know yet that her calmness was the very thing that would alter her life forever, starting today. This was just the beginning of a series of events that, when reflected upon, no one would ever forget. The story began simply, but it carried the potential for a massive transformation. Maya found her seat, 1A, by the window. It was perfect, a spot that others could only dream of. She gently placed her small handbag in the overhead compartment and sat down, crossing her legs. Everything seemed peaceful until the flight was ready for takeoff. A few minutes later, a flight attendant entered the cabin, scanning the passengers with a scrutinizing look. His gaze swept across the faces around him until it stopped at Maya. He walked over, holding a tablet, searching for her information. A flicker of suspicion passed through his eyes. "Excuse me, may I see your ticket?" he asked, his voice not friendly, but a cold demand. Maya lifted her head, looking at him calmly, unfazed. "Is there a problem?" she asked gently, but with a strong undercurrent of confidence. "We need to verify your ticket," he replied, his tone not quite suspicious, but tinged with a certain tension. Maya didn't respond. She silently handed him her ticket. He checked it for a moment, then nodded, though his face remained unchanged. "Your ticket is valid," he said, "but I need you to clarify something." Maya was confused. She remained seated, her eyes following the plane as it slowly began to roll down the runway, preparing for takeoff. However, things weren't as simple as they seemed. He didn't stop there. Soon after, another security officer walked in, approached Maya, and instructed her to leave the first-class cabin. "You shouldn't be sitting here," the officer said, forcefully pulling her bag out of the compartment. "You need to leave. We will handle this later." Maya didn't resist. She stood up, turned the cabin handle, and stepped outside, despite the eyes of the other passengers following her. No one spoke. No one did anything. The other passengers simply stood and watched, with no one daring to speak up for her. Some even quietly recorded the incident. Maya stepped off the plane as calm as ever, and then, when she left the first-class cabin, everything stopped being just a personal incident. It would become a moment that millions of people would never forget. The passengers on this flight didn't know that the girl they thought didn't deserve to be in first class was, in fact, the one with the power to decide everything that would happen next. That girl, Maya Johns, was not who they thought she was, and the consequences of what they had done to her would be beyond anything they could ever imagine. This flight wasn't just a simple journey from Atlanta to Los Angeles. It marked the beginning of a tense battle over power, justice, and inevitable change. Maya stepped out of the first-class cabin, her steps light yet resolute. She was not a weak person, nor was she someone easily defeated by cold stares and harsh judgments. But today, as she was treated like an intruder in a space she didn't deserve to be in, she felt a sting of humiliation. However, that didn't break her. On the contrary, it ignited a flame within her that couldn't be extinguished. As she walked off the plane, there was no protest. The passengers around her just stood and watched. Some shrugged, others looked back at her like she was a stranger, someone who shouldn't be in that space. But no one stood up. No one spoke out to defend her. She walked in silence, passing by strangers, people who didn't care about her, only focused on one thing. She didn't fit their idea of what was worthy. Yet for Maya, this wasn't a personal struggle. It was a fight for principles, a battle for justice and dignity. She wasn't the only one who had to endure such discrimination, but she would be the first to stand up and speak about it. As she passed through the gate, she noticed the eyes still following her, but instead of feeling ashamed or anxious, she felt a strange calm spread within her. She knew that things had gone too far and couldn't be undone now. Still, she also knew that, despite everything, she would hold on to her dignity. She wasn't afraid to face the challenges ahead because she knew she was doing the right thing. After she stepped off the plane, Maya received a call from her father, Marcus Davis, CEO of SkyJet Airlines, but she didn't answer. She knew he was worried, but she needed time to process what had just happened. She didn't want to talk about the racism, didn't want to talk about the injustice she had endured, at least not immediately. But one thing was certain. She would not let this go. The feeling of loneliness overwhelmed her as she sat on the cold seat in the airport's security area. Everything around her continued, but in that moment, Maya was the only one who felt the isolation. She didn't cry, didn't scream, she was silent, allowing her heart to stabilize after the shock. She knew the people around her were speculating about why she had been removed from the plane, but they didn't know that, in a fleeting moment, she'd become a symbol of the injustice so many others had to face. An hour later, as she waited, her phone rang again. This time she didn't hesitate to pick up. On the other end was the deep voice of her father. "Maya, are you okay? I just heard the news. What happened?" His voice was filled with concern, betraying the tension he felt. Maya paused for a moment, then spoke softly. "I'm fine, Dad. I just don't want to be seen as weak. I don't want you to be disappointed in me." Marcus was silent for a moment before responding, his voice firm. "You have nothing to be disappointed about, Maya. I'll do everything I can to make this right. You're my daughter, and no one can take away your rights." Maya could hear the strength in her father's voice, but she knew that this wasn't just her issue with her father. It was something much bigger. What had happened today wasn't the first instance of racial discrimination in the airline industry, but it was the first time that someone with power like her had to face it directly, and that's why she felt the need to speak out. She wouldn't let this incident pass like so many others without change. She wouldn't let the wrongdoings continue to be hidden. Dad, I want to help change what's happening in the airline industry. I want people to understand that no one should be treated this way, Maya said, her voice resolute. Marcus listened, and then replied, I'll help you, Maya. I'll do everything I can to change this, but you have to be prepared. It's not going to be easy. Maya nodded, even though he couldn't see her, but she could feel the determination in his words. She knew that, though things would be difficult, she was ready. This battle wasn't just about a seat in first class. It was about a society, a system where people like Maya weren't welcome, where they were judged not by their abilities, but by their outward appearance. She had stepped off the plane today, but in her heart, a new battle had just begun. This was the moment that not just Maya, but the entire world would have to reevaluate what had happened. And one day, those who had deemed her unworthy would have to face a truth they could no longer deny. Maya sat in her hotel room, the dim light casting shadows over her contemplative face. Outside the window, the lights of Atlanta twinkled, but in this quiet space, Maya's mind was fighting with thoughts and emotions she had never faced before. Every beat of her heart felt heavy, not out of fear, but from the tension and the injustice she had just experienced. She knew this wouldn't end here. While the incident might be swept under the rug for a time, it would never fade, at least not in her heart or in the actions she would take next. Never before had Maya felt the need to do something so monumental, and never before had she felt the power within her as strongly as she did now. A phone call startled her. She looked at the screen. Dad. It was Marcus Davis, her father, the man who had always protected her, not just in her moments of weakness, but also in the toughest situations. She picked up the call, and her father's voice rang through, filled with worry and determination. Maya, are you okay? Have you thought this through? I can help you, but you have to know this will be very difficult. Maya could feel the caution in her father's words, but she also understood that he was concerned not just for her, but for the repercussions their family would face. This was no simple matter. But Maya had made up her mind. She couldn't remain silent any longer. Dad, I can't let this go quietly. I can't just sit back and let others decide my fate. This isn't just about me. I can't think about just getting fairness for myself. I have to fight for everyone who's been treated this way. Her father was silent for a moment, then replied firmly, You're right. I know you're strong, but you have to remember you're not alone in this fight. You have power, and if you act right, you can change an entire system. Maya heard those words, and a powerful feeling surged within her. Yes, she wasn't alone. She had power. Not just because her father was the CEO of SkyJet Airlines, but because she was the one who could change how the world viewed those discriminated against. She wasn't just a young girl mistreated, she could be a symbol for justice. The meeting with the community. The next day when dawn broke, Maya decided she wouldn't let the injustice slip by without a clear response. She had planned an urgent press conference, not only to speak about what had happened, but also to call for change in the airline industry. She stood in front of the mirror, observing herself in a simple yet powerful business suit. A black blazer, a crisp white shirt, her hair cascading naturally. Everything was perfect, but her heart beat strongly, anxiously, and with determination. She knew that once she spoke, nothing would be the same. This wasn't just a regular conversation. It was the beginning of a revolution for justice. When the press conference began, the air was tense from the very first second. A barrage of cameras and microphones pointed at her. People were waiting for a strong reaction, an explanation for her actions. But Maya didn't fear. She stood firm, offering a slight smile, and began to speak. Hello, everyone. I'm Maya Johnson. I know that today I stand before you not because I want pity or sympathy. I'm here for one reason: justice. We cannot continue to live in a world where racism is considered normal. People should not be judged by their skin color or appearance, but by their actions, talents, and character. Maya spoke, her voice strong and clear, not a trace of fear. She looked directly at those watching, and no one could ignore the seriousness in her eyes. Every word she spoke felt like a blow to the hearts of her listeners, forcing them to rethink the values they had been following. What happened yesterday wasn't just a personal incident. It's part of a much larger system, a system that has set up invisible barriers to prevent people like me from stepping into spaces where I completely deserve to be. But today I want you to understand that I'm not a victim. I am the one who will stand against this injustice. The room fell into heavy silence as the press, executives, and all those watching the press conference realized that this wasn't just a casual conversation. This was a declaration of war against a system that had lasted too long, and change, no matter how difficult, would come. The long road ahead. When the press conference ended, Maya realized that she had not only created a turning point for herself, but for all those who would face racial discrimination in the future. She didn't know what would happen next. She might face resistance from those who wanted to preserve old values, but she was no longer afraid. She stepped out of the conference room, her heart filled with determination. She knew this battle wouldn't be easy. But once it had started, she wouldn't stop until everything was changed. She wouldn't let anyone else endure the feeling she had just experienced. She would stand up for justice and for all those who had remained silent for far too long. Maya had awakened, and now she would lead the change. After the press conference, Maya felt a profound shift within herself. She was no longer the quiet girl sitting in first class. She was now a warrior, standing up for justice, not just for herself, but for all those who had been treated unfairly. She knew what she had started today wouldn't be easy, but once she had made the decision, there was no turning back. In the days that followed, Maya received countless calls and messages from the media, human rights organizations, and those who sympathized with her. But what mattered most to her now was not the praise or the attention from the public. It was what she could do to change the system that had been blocking fairness. She didn't want to just be a symbol. She wanted to be someone who would truly create change. Immediately after the press conference, Maya met with her father, Marcus Davis, to plan the next steps. He looked at her with eyes full of pride, but also concern. "Maya, you understand that we're facing a system that not just us, but others too, have to change. What you're doing today will not only be your struggle, but the struggle of all those who don't have the power to speak up." Maya nodded, her gaze resolute and unwavering. "Dad, I know. But I won't give up. I will make changes in this airline industry so that no one has to be treated the way I have been." Maya decided to start by pushing for an internal investigation within SkyJet Airlines. She demanded that all records of racial discrimination within the company be opened, from the smallest incidents to the most severe cases. She knew that only when all the truths were exposed could real reform begin. But this wouldn't be easy. She realized that the system she was up against wasn't just a few employees who acted wrongly. It was a part of a long-standing culture deeply embedded within the industry. Fighting against the conservatives. First, Maya had to face resistance from within the company. Even though her father was the CEO of SkyJet, he understood that change couldn't happen overnight, and not everyone in the company was ready to let go of the habits that had existed for decades. Some of the senior executives and managers at SkyJet began to oppose the expansion of the investigation, fearing that major scandals would be exposed and affect the airline's reputation. Some even criticized Maya for creating such a public stir, putting the company in a difficult position. However, Maya was undeterred. She decided not only to continue with the internal investigation, but also to publicly expose all the wrongdoing she uncovered. Negotiations in the boardroom grew tense. The older, more conservative executives couldn't bear the pressure from Maya's demands, and the debates between them became increasingly heated, but no one could change her mind. "You may oppose this, but what I'm doing is for justice and for all the passengers you've ignored," Maya said in a meeting with the board. She didn't need to call for consensus because she knew justice would be on her side, even if it meant standing against an entire system. In the end, an independent investigation was launched. All the cases of racial discrimination, mishandling of discriminated passengers, and related evidence were brought into the light. The forgotten stories, the victims who couldn't speak up, now had the chance to tell the truth. And Maya was the one behind all these changes. The reformation begins. As the investigation reached its public phase, Maya decided to expand the scope of the change. She didn't just want to reform within SkyJet, she wanted to spread this message throughout the entire airline industry. Maya participated in conferences, worked with human rights organizations, and continuously advocated for the need for a more transparent and fair system in handling racial discrimination cases. Maya and her allies developed a strategy to bring the airline industry into a new era, where racism would have no place. She demanded that all airlines disclose data about passenger complaints and implement clear procedures for handling racial discrimination cases. She also pushed for independent organizations to step in and evaluate airline policies with the goal of creating a fair and respectful environment for all. She didn't forget to work with regulatory authorities to call for sanctions against companies that didn't comply with anti-discrimination regulations. She believed that only with strict oversight from the outside could the changes be sustainable and effective. Painful consequences. As things began to fall into place, Maya never imagined that her decisions would trigger a strong backlash from the conservative forces within the industry. Not only were there boycotts from groups within the industry, but influential figures in the financial world also began to criticize her. They argued that such rapid changes would cause chaos and severely impact the economy. However, Maya wasn't afraid. She was prepared to face these attacks. "People may criticize me, they may disagree with me, but I will not stop. I'm not here for personal gain, I'm here for justice," Maya said, resolutely in an interview. She had mentally prepared herself to face every challenge, and she would not back down. Maya had become a symbol of resilience, of the fight for the rights of those who had been racially discriminated against. But she also knew this fight was far from over. There was still so much to do, so many challenges ahead. But one thing was certain. The change had begun, and no one could stop it. As the days passed, Maya felt an increasingly powerful force growing within her. She knew that the fight she was engaged in was not just personal, it was a battle against the system. With each passing day, her steps were not only being noticed within the airline industry, but were also causing ripples throughout other sectors of society. The conservatives, those who were used to maintaining their power, were no longer silent. They were no longer standing on the sidelines. They were quietly resisting, trying to conceal the truth. Maya knew that the internal investigation at SkyJet Airlines, though progressing robustly, had not yet reached the heart of the matter. While numerous instances of racial discrimination within the system had been brought to light, she still felt that something crucial was missing. She could not let this continue to be about isolated incidents in one company. She wanted to change an entire system, a whole industry, that had allowed racism to thrive without ever being confronted by strong resistance. Uncovering hidden secrets. One morning as Maya sat in her office, a sudden call came in. On the other end of the line was Elijah, a security technician at SkyJet Airlines, someone she had worked with before. He was the only one within the company staff that Maya felt she could truly trust. Elijah had been in contact with her throughout the investigation, helping her spot unusual patterns in the system. "Maya, I've just found something very strange in the SkyJet system. The video footage from the security cameras at Gate C-24, the place where you were removed from the plane, has been deleted. It wasn't due to a technical fault or power failure. It was intentionally erased." Maya jumped up, a wave of tension flooding her. She knew this was the missing piece she had been looking for. Everything wasn't as simple as she had thought. Someone within the system was trying to hide the truth, not only about the racial discrimination, but also about darker plots within SkyJet. "Can you figure out who did this?" Maya asked, her voice cold but full of determination. "This is serious, Maya. We need to proceed with caution." "I'll continue the investigation and update you when I have more information," Elijah replied before ending the call. Maya could no longer sit idle. She knew that this wasn't just an isolated incident. There were deeper secrets she needed to uncover. What she had done so far was just the tip of the iceberg. Everything, from the racial discrimination within the company to the manipulation of data and attempts to cover up evidence, was part of a much larger, more sinister plan. Resistance from within Maya wasn't just up against external forces. She also had to endure resistance from within her own company. One of the key figures was Victor Langston, the senior executive at SkyJet, who had been an ally during her early days at the company. However, now, with the changes in Maya's approach, Victor no longer agreed with her decisions. In an emergency meeting, Victor faced Maya and her allies. "Maya, I don't think we should push too far with this investigation. What we've uncovered is enough to change policies, but if we go public with everything, it could ruin the trust we've built in the airline industry. We'll destroy SkyJet if we continue down this path." Maya didn't waver. She couldn't let the fear of financial damage or reputational loss cloud the ideals she was pursuing. "Victor, if we don't face the truth, can we still call ourselves a trustworthy company? Everything I'm doing is to protect the company's reputation, not just mine." Victor's eyes flickered with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Maya, I hope you know what you're doing. We're not just confronting an internal issue, but a system that none of us can change alone." Maya turned to look at her allies, the colleagues who had supported her from the beginning. She knew that this wasn't a battle she had to fight alone. She had built a team of people who were ready to fight for justice, and with them Maya felt the immense strength that was gradually coming together. Reaching the truth. The next day, Maya received an intriguing message from Elijah. He had successfully accessed the storage system and found footage that had been deleted, proof that there had been manipulation. Elijah sent her a video clip that had been erased almost immediately after the incident at Gate C-24. When Maya watched the video, she was struck by a real shock. The footage not only recorded the moment Maya was forced off the plane, but also showed secretive exchanges between several senior executives and airline staff discussing how to handle passengers who didn't meet SkyJet's standards. Maya was furious, but she didn't let her anger take over. She knew this was the key to exposing everything that was happening behind the scenes. This was the most concrete evidence she could use to speak out, not just for herself, but for all the passengers who had been treated unjustly. Maya decided to confront Victor Langston and several senior executives head-on. She no longer hesitated, and she was no longer afraid to face those who were trying to conceal the truth. "Victor, I can't let these secrets continue to be hidden. This isn't just about me or SkyJet. This is about all those who have suffered from discrimination and had their rights suppressed for far too long," Maya said, her eyes blazing with belief and resolve. Bringing the truth to light. The next meeting between Maya and the board of directors was unlike any meeting they had held before. This wasn't a meeting about finances or company strategies. This was a direct confrontation with the truth. Maya had gathered all the evidence she needed. The videos, the secret conversations, everything was laid bare. She looked directly at Victor, the senior executive, and said, "If you don't act today, I will bring all this evidence to light. Not only SkyJet, but the entire airline industry will face a massive shift." The room fell silent. The tension in the air was palpable. But Maya didn't flinch. She had all the necessary tools to push back the darkness and bring light to what had been hidden for too long. The truth could not remain buried forever. Maya never imagined that she would have to take such a drastic step, but she was ready. The silence of those around her, the criticism from the conservatives in the industry and within the company, these only made her more determined. After the crucial meeting, no apologies or agreements were made. The glances from the directors in the meeting room were filled with dissatisfaction and worry, but Maya no longer cared. The next day, Maya sat in her office, her eyes focused on the computer screen, where she was preparing a new plan. She knew that she couldn't stop now. She had found the crucial pieces that would allow her to change the system. And now she was going to take this fight to the next level. She received a call from Elijah, the security technician at SkyJet, who had helped her track down key evidence. At first, she only saw the information he provided as small clues, but over time she realized that each detail could change the entire situation. Elijah was the only person within the company she could trust, and now he had uncovered something incredibly important. "Maya, I found something strange. Not only were the video clips deleted, but there's also a series of internal emails that have been tampered with in SkyJet's system. Some senior employees in the company have deleted key evidence related to the acts of racial discrimination. They are trying to cover up the evidence and make the complaints go unnoticed." Maya sighed, feeling the weight of what was unfolding. This was no longer just a personal fight. This was a fight against an entire corrupt system where power could hide the truth. She knew that if she didn't act now, everything she had done would be meaningless. She responded with a determined voice. "Elijah, I need you to track those emails down. Retrieve all the deleted evidence. We can't let these people get away with this, and I'm going to take it further. I can't just fight for myself." Preparing the final strike. Maya began to plan her final strike. The attack not just on the individuals who had intentionally participated in the conspiracy, but also on the entire system they were protecting. She knew that for change to happen, she couldn't stand alone. She needed strong public support. Support from organizations and from powerful individuals in society. That evening, as she sat alone in the quiet room, her eyes on the documents on the desk, she began drafting a letter that would change everything. This letter would not only be an accusation of racial discrimination at SkyJet, but also a powerful message to the entire airline industry that racial discrimination would never be tolerated again. Justice cannot be hidden. The truth cannot be erased by greedy minds. Those behind this racism will face the consequences. I am not here just for one individual, but for all those who have been discriminated against, whose voices and rights have been silenced. Maya knew that this letter would be the end of the cover-ups that had lasted for so long, and when she clicked send, she understood that she had officially declared war on an outdated system that had existed for far too long without being challenged. The story of truth begins to spread. The next day, Maya began receiving support from human rights organizations and celebrities. People began calling for change in the airline industry. Banners with the slogan, "No room for racism in aviation," appeared everywhere. News outlets and media quickly picked up Maya's story, not only because she was a brave young woman, but because she had dared to stand up for what was right. She didn't just receive support from the public, she also gained backing from politicians and influential figures in society. Discussions about racism in the airline industry began to surface on international forums. Maya's story became a beacon for those who had been forgotten, for those who had endured discrimination without a voice. Maya faces the powerful. That day, a special meeting was called at SkyJet Airlines. Maya and her father, Marcus Davis, had requested a meeting with all the executives and senior leaders of the company. This was a pivotal meeting where Maya would present all the evidence she had gathered and demand a comprehensive reform. Maya walked into the meeting room with a confident demeanor. It was the moment she knew that she would not just be facing those who had wronged her, but also an entire system that had existed for too long and was now trying everything it could to protect itself. Every executive in the room understood that today's confrontation would not just be about words. This would be a turning point for change they never expected. Marcus stood beside his daughter, his eyes full of pride. He had done everything he could to help Maya, but today he knew that Maya was the one who would decide the fate of SkyJet. Everyone, I have all the evidence needed to initiate an internal investigation. If you have nothing to hide, why fear the truth being made public? Maya spoke, her voice resolute and unwavering. The meeting continued with an intensity that was indescribable. The people in the room could feel that Maya was not only pushing back against racial discrimination within the company, but also challenging their very authority. And in the end, the truth triumphed. Waiting for justice. After the meeting, SkyJet Airlines officially announced that they would implement comprehensive reforms to handle complaints and address racial discrimination issues. An independent body would be established to monitor all incidents and ensure that no passenger would ever face injustice again. These changes would not only affect SkyJet, but would also serve as a wake-up call for the entire aviation industry. Maya stood at the peak of a mountain, where she could see the world beginning to change. She had fought for what was right, and now change had come. The battle was not over, but she knew that she had done something important. She had not only uncovered the truth, but she had also changed an entire system so that others would not have to endure what she had gone through. She had won, not just for herself, but for all those who stood behind her. Maya stood before the doors of SkyJet Airlines headquarters, a heavy yet proud feeling pressing down on her. Everything now was different. Her steps were no longer slow or hesitant like they once were. She was no longer the girl who silently faced injustice. She had become a symbol of change, a testament to the power of justice. Although much had changed, Maya knew that the battle was far from over. Throughout the past few months, she had done what no one else dared to do. She had brought the truth to light, defied a system that had long protected the interests of the powerful. But facing an empire like SkyJet, Maya understood that one victory wasn't enough. She needed to hold firm, protect the changes she had initiated, and most importantly, continue to fight for those who had no voice. Today, she wasn't just there to witness the reform she had set in motion. She was there to begin another fight, a true fight for protection and the preservation of justice. Exposing all the secrets. During the internal investigation, previously hidden details about racial discrimination at SkyJet began to surface. Recordings, emails, secret conversations between executives. Everything showed that these wrongdoings were not random incidents, but part of a system that had been built over years. One of the most notable discoveries was regarding Gregory Holt, SkyJet's global security director. This man, once known for his authority and influence, was one of the masterminds behind the manipulation of the system, covering up complaints and even ordering the deletion of video footage capturing racist behavior on flights. Gregory's actions weren't just misconduct. They were a betrayal of the values the company claimed to uphold. When Maya discovered this, a cold chill spread through her. It wasn't surprise, but anger. She had been deceived by those she once considered allies, and now she couldn't let them escape responsibility. A tense confrontation. After gathering enough evidence, Maya decided to confront Gregory Holt and the senior executives of SkyJet directly. She knew this wouldn't be a regulars meeting. This would be the meeting where she would force them to face their mistakes, and more importantly, She wouldn't accept any excuses or cover-ups. The meeting took place in SkyJet's executive office, where the most powerful individuals in the company were seated. Maya walked in holding a thick folder, and in her eyes was a confidence so strong that no one could deny it. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here today to demand the truth and justice, not just for myself, but for all the passengers who have been unfairly treated by this company. All I ask for is transparency and a public apology. But I know that those apologies can't change what's happened. The ones who manipulated the system, who erased evidence of racism, will have to face the consequences, Maya began, her voice unwavering and full of strength. Gregory Holt sat across from her, his face pale. The room seemed to be suffocating with tension. No one dared speak, for they knew Maya was not someone who could be easily subdued. Still, Gregory tried to protest. Maya, this is what we've done for the stability of the company. These events were just misunderstandings. If you want me to take responsibility, I'll work with you to resolve everything through the proper legal channels. Maya didn't give him a chance to finish. She slammed the folder onto the table, opened it, and pointed to an audio recording. "Listen to this," she said. The recording played in the meeting room, capturing a conversation between Gregory and another executive, discussing how to delete evidence related to racial discrimination on flights. "We can't let this be made public. If we do, we'll lose all our customers." Gregory's voice was clear, showing no sign of concern. Maya stopped the recording and looked straight at Gregory. "The price for silence and cover-ups is too great, and today you will all pay for it. The true change begins." This confrontation not only unsettled Gregory and the people in the room, but also marked the beginning of a great change. After the recording was revealed, the remaining executives couldn't justify their actions. The truth could no longer be denied. Maya continued, "I demand that you stop blaming each other and face the truth. SkyJet will have to change from the root. If you do not act accordingly, your company will also face external authorities should you fail to do the right thing." Some of the directors sat in silence while others began to react. They knew that things had gone too far. The misconduct could no longer be hidden. At the end of the meeting, Maya and her father, Marcus Davis, had made significant progress in bringing the changes to SkyJet's system. New laws regarding anti-racism would be enforced immediately, and all related cases would be investigated transparently and publicly. A new era begins with her bold actions. Maya didn't just change SkyJet. She impacted the entire airline industry. New laws and procedures would be implemented across major airlines, and no one could ever again dismiss those who were racially discriminated against. Maya had stood up, not just to reclaim her own rights, but for all those who couldn't protect themselves. What she had accomplished proved to the world the power of a young woman. But more importantly, she had created a milestone in the fight against racial discrimination, a battle that she knew would never truly end. But now she was leading it. She stood on the peak of a mountain, not for personal victory, but because she had changed a system, fought for those without a voice. And she knew that when this battle ended, many more stories, many more people, would continue walking the path she had opened. Maya stood by the window of her office, her eyes gazing into the distance where the first light of morning illuminated the city of Atlanta. It felt surreal, almost like a sign of a new beginning, but also a reminder of all she had endured. She wasn't the only one in this fight. Yet today, as she looked at the clear blue sky and saw birds soaring high above, Maya felt she had come a long way. But at the same time, she knew that a much bigger battle lay ahead. SkyJet had agreed to make significant reforms. The company had officially implemented strict procedures for dealing with racial discrimination, and committed to opening a public investigation into passenger complaints. But Maya did not stop there. She couldn't be content with the initial changes she had brought about. What she wanted was an all-encompassing change, a reform that would last forever and could have a positive impact not just in the airline industry but across other industries as well. She realized that the powerful individuals and those who had wronged her in the past would not sit idly by. They would resist, they would try to cover up the truth, and they would attempt to turn the situation around. And so she needed to prepare for the challenges ahead. Attacking the core of the system. Maya knew that although the internal investigation at SkyJet had been conducted, this was not the end. The system she was fighting against was not just a few individuals acting wrongfully. It was a long-established structure, a system built over time to maintain discrimination and injustice. The reforms she and her family had put in place were important, but to ensure that these changes would endure and grow, she had to do something even stronger. She began implementing her next plan, a more comprehensive strategy to attack the heart of the system. Not just SkyJet, but all other airlines and even large organizations in the aviation industry would be subjected to strict oversight and reform. She reached out to major human rights organizations, social activists, and even government agencies. Maya had prepared all the documentation and evidence of racial discrimination, not only within SkyJet, but across other airlines. She was determined not to let these wrongdoings be concealed any longer. By collaborating with reputable organizations, Maya created a powerful front to push back against the injustice. That evening, as she stood in front of the mirror once again looking at herself, her eyes glowed with determination. She was no longer just a young woman fighting for justice. She was the first one to start this battle, and she would be the one to end it. Facing new leaders, Maya knew that this change couldn't just be about one company or one industry. If she wanted to create real change, she had to face the powerful leaders throughout the entire system. One of her biggest goals was to convince leaders in the aviation industry and the government of the need for widespread reforms. Then the opportunity arrived. An international conference on the airline industry was being held, bringing together executives from major airlines, government officials, and international organizations. This was Maya's chance to bring her message to the world. She knew that without support from influential people in the industry, her vision for change would remain nothing more than a distant dream. On the morning of the conference, Maya walked into the meeting room feeling as if she was stepping into a battle. The room was filled with airline executives, government officials, and major investors. Maya felt like a small fish in the vast ocean of power and wealth. But no, she didn't feel weak anymore. She was much stronger than she had ever imagined. When Maya stood up to speak, the atmosphere in the room suddenly fell silent. She held the microphone in her hand with no hesitation. The eyes of everyone in the room were fixed on her, but Maya didn't feel nervous. She began speaking. We cannot sit back and let these mistakes continue to be covered up. For too long we have witnessed acts of racial discrimination, unfair treatment of passengers simply because of their skin color or background. These actions not only violate human rights, but they also destroy the very essence of the airline industry, a sector built on the foundation of service and respect for all customers. Her voice resonated powerfully, but without being harsh. Maya didn't need to yell or criticize. All she needed to do was speak the truth and stand her ground. And as she finished her statement, the executives in the room could no longer remain silent. They looked at each other, unable to deny that Maya was not just confronting them, but leading a revolution. This is not just an issue for SkyJet, but for the entire aviation industry, and I will not stop fighting until justice is served on every flight, for every passenger. A new system is built. That day, after Maya's speech, a major change began. The leaders in the airline industry could no longer ignore the issues they had long overlooked. Human rights organizations began pushing for stronger investigations and oversight regarding discrimination in the airline industry. New regulations were established, requiring all airlines to disclose data about complaints and evidence related to racial discrimination, with stronger and more transparent measures for handling them. At the same time, the reforms Maya had initiated would not only apply to SkyJet, but would spread across the entire aviation industry. Mandatory surveys, transparent reports, and anti-discrimination training became compulsory for all major airlines. Wrongdoings would no longer be swept under the rug, and passengers who had been discriminated against would have the right to be heard and protected. A new world awaits. As the conference ended, Maya left the meeting room with a sense of relief, but also filled with determination. She knew that this battle was far from over, but today she had truly made a difference, not just in the airline industry, but in how everyone viewed fairness and rights. She stepped out of the conference, looking into the distance where the sky remained clear, and she knew her journey had never truly ended. Maya stood outside the SkyJet Airlines building, filled with resolve. This was an important day, the day she would witness the fruits of her relentless efforts, a day when she would no longer be the girl who had been discriminated against, but the one leading the fight to reclaim justice for those who could not speak up. While she had achieved so much during this journey, she knew that only when justice had been fully served would she truly be at peace. She walked into the building, once the epicenter of all the wrong decisions and cover-ups. But today, Maya wasn't here to witness any more concealment. She was here to ensure that everything would be made clear, and those who had abused their power would pay the price. The changes she had sparked were no longer just a chapter in SkyJet's history. They were a symbol of zero tolerance for racial discrimination, a call for the rebuilding of a system that would respect everyone regardless of skin color or background. The tension-filled steps. Maya entered the boardroom of SkyJet, where all the executives and senior staff were sitting and waiting. She could see the tension on their faces. This was not a normal meeting. They knew that today was not the day for negotiations or compromise. She held in her hands all the evidence needed to prove corruption and racial discrimination within the company. And now, she was ready to turn everything upside down. Maya looked around the room, her gaze unwavering. She knew these people had tried to stay silent, to hide the truth, but they couldn't do that anymore. Maya had come here to end the cover-ups and deceit. She wasn't just facing the people in the company, she was facing deep-seated prejudices embedded within the entire airline industry. Resolving the conflict, Maya began her conversation with the executives calmly, but her voice carried a determination that no one could ignore. We're here not to deny the truth, but to face it. Those who have manipulated this system, those who have abused their power, will have to take responsibility. But more importantly, we must change the way SkyJet operates, change the way the entire airline industry perceives and treats passengers like me. Victor Langston, the executive who had always opposed Maya during the investigation, now looked at her with a gaze filled with anger. Yet he couldn't deny the clear evidence she had presented. Maya, these changes will have a significant impact on the company. We can't just turn everything into a public war. We need to find a reasonable solution. Maya didn't let Victor's resistance deter her. A reasonable solution? Victor, the reasonable solution is facing the truth. All of your actions have led to an unjust foundation, where people like me have no place. There can be no solution unless we completely end this discrimination. A heavy silence fell over the room. Maya's words not only affected the psyche of those sitting in the room, but reflected a reality they had tried to deny for so many years. There was no more room for justification, no room for vague excuses. Rebuilding the entire system. Maya wasn't just here to accuse, she was here to implement a comprehensive plan for change. Today I demand that SkyJet undergo a complete overhaul. First, all passengers who have been discriminated against will be compensated, and the employees involved in these cases will face legal consequences. Second, we need an independent monitoring system to ensure that none of us can repeat the past mistakes. And finally, I will require all of you to participate in training on fairness and equality in the airline industry. The people in the room couldn't help but reflect on what Maya had said. They knew that if they didn't act now, they would not only lose their reputation, but could also face serious legal consequences. Eventually, Victor stood up, his face no longer showing the defiance it once held, but rather a sense of acceptance. Maya, I can't deny what you've brought forward. I agree that we need to change. And I also understand that if we don't act now, SkyJet won't survive in the long run. Maya looked at him, not with a victorious gaze, but with understanding. This is not a personal victory. This is the victory of justice, and justice must be implemented not just once, but forever. Speaking up for the victims. Right after the meeting, Maya decided to do more than work within the company. She continued to speak out publicly to protect those passengers without a voice. She began organizing meetings with human rights organizations, social activists, and those who had been discriminated against in other industries. She wanted her message to reach farther, that not just in the airline industry, but in every industry, justice must always come first. She, along with her allies, continued to fight for stronger initiatives around fairness, protecting the rights of the discriminated, and creating a solid legal foundation to protect victims of racial discrimination. The results and opportunities for the future Maya's story was no longer just a personal one. It was the story of a generation. She had stood up not only for herself, but for all those who had been pushed to the margins of society. And now, after everything, she saw herself not just as the person who changed SkyJet, but as the one who had sparked a powerful wave of reform in the airline industry and beyond. When Mia looked in the mirror, she no longer saw a young girl who had been hurt. She saw a warrior, a person fighting for what was right. And she knew that while the road ahead was still long, her steps would always be supported by those who had and would continue to stand for justice. And when this battle ended, Maya would not just be the victor, but the one who had created a foundation for future generations so they would never have to endure discrimination, so they would always have a place in a fair and equal world. Maya stood by the window, gazing at the clouds drifting across the blue sky. This feeling was strange. It was both an ending and a beginning. Throughout this arduous journey, she had faced many challenges, confronted conservatives, and fought against forces that sought to preserve the old ways and conceal the truth. But now, as everything started to settle down, Maya felt a strength within her that even she hadn't expected, the strength of change, the power of justice that had begun to spread through the airline industry and more broadly through society. Today wasn't just the result of what she had done. It was the result of those who had stood by her, those who had fought for a greater ideal. And she knew that while today might mark the end of one battle, it was also the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter filled with hope for those who had been discriminated against, for those who couldn't speak for themselves. She remembered the early days when everything began as a vague sense of the injustice she had endured. At that time, she was just a young girl sitting in first class, dragged from her seat simply because of her skin color. But that moment had changed everything. It hadn't just awakened her. It had awakened the entire airline industry and, more widely, society. She was no longer the girl who had her rights taken from her. She was the one who stood up for all those who had been discriminated against. The execution of justice. As she looked back on her journey, Maya knew she had made a difference, Not only in SkyJet, but across the airline industry, racial discrimination was no longer tolerated. Powerful reforms had been implemented. Complaint procedures for racial discrimination had been established. And most importantly, no passenger would have to endure the injustice she once faced. She remembered the tense moments in the boardroom with SkyJet's executives. Back then, she wasn't just fighting for her own rights, but for all those who had been treated unfairly. She was no longer the weak girl caught in the middle of discrimination. She had become a leader, someone who could change an entire system, and then everything changed. Airplane tickets were no longer a symbol of discrimination. Every passenger, regardless of their skin color or background, now had the right to sit in any cabin they chose, with respect and dignity. Confidence in every step. Maya had not only changed an industry, but she had also become a symbol for everyone who had faced discrimination. She had become the epitome of resilience, of never giving up. Though there was still much to do, she had shown one clear thing. Change was possible as long as we dared to stand up and face the challenges. Maya had not only won the fight against racial discrimination in the airline industry, she had won over herself. She had conquered fear, doubt, and most importantly, she had won over the passivity within herself. And that was the greatest victory she could be proud of. She understood that change was never easy, and it didn't always happen instantly. But when she looked back at how far she had come, she felt proud of what she had accomplished. More importantly, she felt proud of what she'd created for the generations to come. Leading a revolution of equality. Maya's work was far from over. She knew that the change in the airline industry was just a part of a larger battle. She had planned to expand these reforms across all sectors, not just in the airline industry, but in other fields where racial discrimination and injustice still existed silently. Maya began working with international organizations and social leaders to push for regulations on fairness and anti-discrimination across all sectors. What she had started at SkyJet had now become a larger movement, a revolution to protect the rights of the disadvantaged and discriminated. Maya continued to appear at international forums, human rights conferences, and became a spokesperson for a future where discrimination would no longer exist. She was not just the one who changed the airline industry. She was the one opening the doors for equality, for justice in all areas of society. A lasting legacy. With everything Maya had done, she wasn't simply a symbol of change. She had created an enduring legacy. That legacy wasn't just in the reforms of the airline industry, but in the value she passed on to future generations. She had proven that one individual, no matter how small, could make a huge difference if they dared to stand up for what was right. And when Maya looked back, she didn't just see a battle that had ended. She saw a brighter future, one where no one would face racial discrimination, where everyone would be respected no matter who they were. Finally, Maya knew that this journey wasn't just hers alone. It was the journey of all those who had walked with her. Every person who had joined this fight had contributed to creating a more just world, and that was the greatest gift she could give to the generations ahead. As everything began to quiet down, as the waves of public opinion started to subside, Maya returned to her family, to the friends who had always stood by her. They knew that justice had been served, and what Maya had done would live on in the hearts of all. She had not only changed the airline industry, she had changed the world. And thus, a new chapter began. A chapter not just for Maya, but for all those who had stood up for justice, for equality, and for human rights.